Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new day at SRE Day London, one of the best conferences around reliability. I'm not biased. I just enjoy this conference a lot. And today we're going to have an interesting talk with Lena. But before that, I want to just see a little bit about maybe a little bit of hands. Who of you have a platform in your organization? Yeah, this is great. This is proving that statistics are real because around 80% of the companies who were surveyed last year said that they had some sort of platform in their organization. And that's going to be great context because we're going to be talking about platform engineering and how to mix the world of SRE in. Oh, I have a clicker. I'm not used to the wonders of technology. But before we get into that, I want to tell you a story that started in 2020, a year that we all remember as a wonderful year where nothing wrong happened. Specifically, I want to talk about March 2020, where something really big happened. And it's that Backstage got released. This time, Spotify open sourced Backstage, and the term platform engineering did not exist. This is all relatively new. It was just in the middle of a crazy world. It said it was the perfect timing to release this open source thing. But it created a huge wave in the industry because it was promising to solve issues that we all struggle with. And we all dream about a world up to date when we can have all of the documentation for systems in a single place, all of the software assets that we manage across all kind of stacks in a single catalog, all kind of self-service assets, all served through one place, and it's all wonderful. It's a paradise. So a lot of people had a lot of money back then in 2020 in technology. So I was working at a consultancy who had six-figure contracts to implement Backstage for these big companies. And I was very excited because we got into the journey very early. So then I was like, this tool is really cool. I'm going to join this startup that's going to make it easier to make Backstage being used by companies. So I joined a company who was going to make Backstage as a service. And rapidly, I learned that the problem with Backstage was not how much it took to install it or to set it up. The problem that it has is something that is, I have a clicker, is ever challenge of platform engineering, which is adoption. You can build something wonderful. You can say that you have the solution of everything. But how can you convince a bunch of engineers who already are maxed out and they have a lot of issues to deal with? And on top of that, you're like, hey, I built this. You should start using it. Change everything you've done for years and use my new cool tool. Like, people are just like, cool. But we are going to continue to do things the same way we always have. Because they have other priorities. It is often not even known that the platform has features that they can use, and it's not that smooth to get into it because there's also an alignment issue. And that is because platform engineering is a very new concept in compared to, for example, SRE. SRE is not new. SRE is a very consolidated practice. We've been using the word SRE for at least 20 years since Google released all these books, and it's a practice that no stakeholder will say, oh, let's get rid of the SREs. Nobody wants to be responsible for getting rid of reliability. Like, they may not know what reliability means, but it's, oh, no, we don't want to get rid of these people who make sure that our website is not down. So SREs have a very consolidated presence in even an organization level. And we're traditionally gatekeepers in terms like this is going to production, this is not going to production. And this is something that platform engineers would dream of doing, to have not the tyrant power, but the idea to have such influence. The problem, though, is that a lot of SRE teams are relatively small and they're very efficient. I've seen very impressive teams managing hundreds of developers and hundreds of services and hundreds of thousands of SLOs with 80 SREs. I'm like, how do you do this? And they do it, and they give talks about it. But the problem is that a lot of SRE teams also lack the resources to perform large-scale initiatives to do proactive reliability projects. If you want to change the instrumentation of a cluster that is very old, that is not going to be simple. And that's going to require significant effort that you may not have bandwidth to, and that nobody is going to be like, yeah, let's just divert all of our resources and everything to get this. So a lot of the time, teams get stuck into the firefighting mode, which is not helping anyone, not the SREs, not the company, but this is like a constant tension. So in this talk, we want to explore avenues in which we can use both things to find a third exit. But before we get into it, let me tell you who I am after I've been talking to you about a delirium nonstop. I'm Jorge Lainfiesta. I am a reliability advocate at Rootly, which is an on-call and incident management platform. And we also have an AI SRE. And I got into road biking last year, which means I lost some friends, but I became cooler. And I also write fiction. I won a prize in the Barcelona city for a short story that I wrote. And here today, I am with the magnificent Lena. We met through platform engineering. We've been hanging out for a few years now after a panel that we did in Paris. She's world famous, so I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for introducing me as the magnificent Lena, and I'm quite happy to take that title. So I am Lena Mooneeram. I am an interloper at an SRE conference. I'm a platform engineer. And I'm a platform engineer at a company called Chainalysis, who are the data platform for the blockchain. And most recently, you might notice I'm wearing this, I'm also a 10K medalist. Thank you. Hardest thing I've ever had to work for in my life. And by medalist is I finished and they gave me a medal. But I'm keeping it and I'm not taking it off, I think, for a while. That's my friend and coach and mentor, Kerry, who I said I would give a shout out for. I wouldn't have been able to do it without it. So thank you, Kerry. We've heard about SREs, we've heard about platform, and really it's what are we talking to you about today? And I'm doing that thing, which is I'm probably telling you about something that you might already know. It will sound really simple and really straightforward when I tell you. And also, it's just like we're also in the middle of it. So it's an unfinished story. So where we are at the moment with Chainalysis, we don't have an SRE team. We certainly don't have a formal SRE team. We're people that go in and parachute every so often to try and fix specific problems. What we do have is a fantastic, I am biased, platform team. And it's a central platform team, and we're maybe about 10 engineers, 15 engineers actually, servicing about 120 feature engineers. And we have a number of kind of embedded platform or DevOps engineers that are stuck in a number of specific teams. And we provide for new services. If you want to create a new service, we've got these fantastic platform. You get observability, you get reliability as almost standard out of the box. You click a button with the various ADPs that Jorge mentioned, and you get these great pipelines. Everything works straight out of the box, and it's great. Until it isn't, because we still have a number of kind of legacy and perhaps OG services that were around before the platform. And so getting these services aligned to the golden path is actually quite difficult. Retrofitting these services so that they can make use of the features that we have on the platform is really hard because they look different, they're configured different, and the architecture doesn't naturally align so that you can click a button and we can implement a feature onto these services. Self-service for these teams and these features is a real pain and can be quite difficult for any number of reasons. Part of the reason is that, sorry, this is the first time I've seen that picture. Part of the reason is that these feature teams and the application teams themselves can actually hesitate. It can be quite fearful wanting to move something that works onto a platform that promises such riches, but it actually means that you have to change your service and you have to maybe fix something that maybe isn't necessarily broken. And some of the reasons that these teams hesitate is that the actual, like I said, the perceived risk of moving can feel too high. It can be something really scary to look at, having to perhaps change something and implement changes to something that's already working and is actually really key to the success of the organization. Another one is actually that the investment can look like it's too much. So it might look like it's going to take too many engineers, too long, spending too much money to make these changes just to be aligned to a golden path that lets you do other things. And I guess finally as well, sometimes for engineers, it's that tech debt mountain looks too big. Actually, it just looks like the task is just way too big. And so what we find is a lot of these application teams and feature teams are resistant and they hang back. And even though platform is providing all these self-service approaches, they don't avail themselves of it. So what's a platform team to do, right? We're a platform team. We ideally want everyone to be on our golden path. We want everyone to be using the services that we provide as much as possible because they have all the gates and the guardrails built in, and they help us build and scale engineering at our organisation. This is the reason why I'm at an SRE conference, is because we were looking around and trying to think, look at how could we do this? And we obviously saw our SRE colleagues who've been around a lot longer, as you mentioned, about 20 years. And SREs, from what I see and from what we see, have this approach of embedded teams, but time limited for a specific issue and parachuting in. And so we thought that perhaps that's something that platform can do. We've always approached it from, we build it and they will come, but it doesn't always work that way. They very rarely come without some cajoling and some poking. So we thought perhaps what we could do is emulate what we see SREs doing and send in the platform team. We did that. We got a number of our platform engineering colleagues, worked out which teams we might be able to help, and tried to send them in for a time-limited engagement. This is the way that we approached it. So we did a number of things. The first thing that we did is perhaps not what maybe the SREs might do, but we picked the easy service. We picked the easy route. And it was great. So we went in, it was fantastic. Everything worked. We migrated services really quickly. They fell like dominoes and people loved us. Those engineering teams loved us. And it was really good. We got fantastic results. We were able to move these services from an off the golden path state onto our golden path. And we had great metrics. And we were able, for that quarter, we looked good. Until what we realised is, whilst it was effective, the services that we picked were perhaps the ones that were nearly there anyway. They were the ones also that perhaps didn't have a huge amount of impact on engineering as a whole and actually moving the goalposts for the engineering org. And as it turns out, when we moved on to the perhaps not so easy teams, we found out it hadn't actually prepared us for what really delivers value for our organisation. So we moved on to the next set of teams, the perhaps not so easy ones. And what we thought we could do is, for this time-limited point, is actually teach these teams by example. Because who doesn't want to be a platform engineer? And so we thought we could spend time running sessions, pairing sessions, sometimes for hours, showing them how we can migrate this one service from this off-road state to the golden path state. It was great for us for a bit. And we ran demonstrations of how you can move your services and your infrastructure closer to the golden path. And we created documentation and resources to help teams actually pick up their services and move. And it was great. And that was us driving out the front with all our engineers, hopefully behind us. Didn't really work out. What we found is, when we were driving, we were in charge for our hours and hours of pairing sessions and demonstrations. Perhaps we got some people turning up to the first session, and that rapidly dropped off towards it, because it turns out not everybody wants to be a platform engineer. Don't know why. So we got really low attendance. We got low engagement, where we would perhaps ask for certain things to be done, and we turn up in the next session and it hadn't been done. And really what we got ultimately was a lot of frustration. So platform was frustrated, and I think that feature teams and the application teams were really frustrated, and I think a little bit they were bored. So what next? Someone mentioned the adage about, if you give someone a fish, then they eat for a day. If you teach someone to fish, then they can eat for a lifetime. You feed them for a lifetime. So we thought, okay, that's great. That's what we'll do. That's what we haven't been doing, right? We haven't been teaching them how to fish and how to maybe do it for themselves. Maybe what we've been doing is just showing and demonstrating, showing and telling. So that was the plan. So instead of us driving, what we did is we actually handed over the keys and said, actually, you do it. You build these. We'll work with you to work out what needs to be done, but you do it, and we'll be there to support you and to review your PRs and to help you merge on and to get you where you need to be. And we handed over responsibility and ownership. How do we think that went? Yeah, probably about that. Middle of the road. It was good, right? It was good. We got higher engagement. We got people turning up to the sessions, the calls. We got people actually individually and independently migrating services with our support. So it was really good. And we got much better involvement. And obviously that leads to significantly less frustration for platform engineers and for the feature teams as well, who actually felt that they could own the work and do it. We also found, after having taught them how to fish, the other two things that we learned that were really good in terms of keeping that momentum and keeping that engagement going was having a single point of ownership. And it sounds, again, like I said, I think I'm telling you things that you probably already know, but it's just, we found that when you gave a team ownership, it floundered a little bit. The project floundered. It didn't really get anywhere. The moment that you had a particular individual in charge and leading it and responsible, even if it was one or two individuals, all of a sudden our migration speed and velocity didn't necessarily go through the roof, but it certainly improved and increased. So that was like a key learning point for us with that particular group. And accountability seemed to be a really good key. Another thing that we found, which is perhaps surprising and not surprising, is with some of our sessions, we started having some senior leadership, senior engineering leadership, just sat in on the calls. Most of those calls actually said nothing and probably did nothing and actually didn't contribute necessarily to the calls, but just the fact that they were on some of the migration calls had a massive impact on attendance of those calls, but also engagement, and the quality of the engagement that we had was very different to when they weren't on the calls. So even if you've got a senior, a VP sat there checking their emails, it made a massive difference to the state and the speed of the migrations that we were able to engage and facilitate. Like I said, we're like in the middle. Where are we now? We've done, at this point, we've migrated a particular group, a connected group of engineers and engineering teams, but we're still very much in the middle. We're finding out what works and we're still feeling our way through it. And so really, if anybody has any tips from the SRE world as to how we could do this better and engage better for that time limited period, I'm very much open to hearing more. So yeah, we're absolutely in the middle. Teams are migrating their services away from their off-road state to the managed platform. And we're in a position where we can actually try and work out to provide varying levels of support. So we have some teams that we have to almost sit with all day, and we have some teams that we can just point them at the extensive resources that we've had to create. And whilst I said we're in the middle, we're also very much, it feels like, at the beginning. So we're still learning, we're still feeling our way through this migration of services from off-road to the Golden Path. And what we're learning, so we're at the stage where we're moving into a different directorate to look at a completely different set of services and under different ownership. And what we're actually finding is what we learned with the first group doesn't necessarily apply to the second group. So we had our first group, we're very hands-on, and perhaps we're a little bit needy in terms of support, and we had to provide much more support. This one seems to have they know what they're doing. I was going to use a bad word there. They know what they're doing in certain areas, and they're very confident, and they don't actually want hands-on support. What we're finding is what we learned with the first group actually doesn't necessarily translate to the second group of services very easily. And perhaps what we're learning now is that what we're solving isn't necessarily a technical problem, but perhaps is a human challenge and a people challenge about understanding how to work with people. And for engineers, I think that's, for me anyway, is a little bit hard. So what have we learned so far at the middle and at the beginning? I think what I've learned, certainly, and what my platform team has learned, is that there is no silver bullet. Despite reading that paper many years ago, I obviously never believed it. I'm still looking for the silver bullet, but it isn't there. And really, one size doesn't fit all. And I think what we've really learned is that as engineers, we need to approach it like an engineering problem, even though it is a human problem, but approach it iteratively and in an agile way. So try something. If it doesn't work, don't keep doing it. Try something else. And I think what we've learned as well is that at best, we can aim to not have the solution to everything, but to at least have the solution to a number of different problems that we can pull out when we recognize the signs that they're needed. And ultimately, I think the quote at the bottom is actually from one of the engineers on the time-limited engagement team, was what he said was actually what we want is we just want everyone to want the same thing. And so it doesn't work if you're going into a team and actually they don't want to migrate onto the golden path. They're quite happy where they are. It's never going to work. So we actually, the fundamental point at the beginning of that engagement is you need to go in and everybody needs to want the same thing. Oh, we came up rather quickly. And that is effectively what we're ending with. Jorge and I put together a little bit of a flowchart for the decision-making process of how we approached deciding what technique to use for which teams. And I'm going to publish this again with the caveat that we're in the middle, but we're also still learning and we're still very much at the beginning. And that is us. So thank you very much. If anybody has any other suggestions or advice as to how we could perhaps take more of the kind of SRE approach into platform engineering and help our teams with adoption, I'm all ears. Come and find me. Thank you.